As I continued reading about the P generation's contributions to the concept of God, I finally began to see some similarities with the form of theism I had been taught and believed as a Christian. According to P, God was beyond the comprehension of human beings. The full reality of God would always elude our understanding. Rather, only the manifestation of God could be seen, the glory of Yahweh. This conception of the theistic God was further developed by the Greek Jew Philo of Alexandria in 30 BCE. According to Philo, God's essence was unknowable and shrouded in impenetrable mystery. The only way we knew him was through his powers, which he used to interact with our world. God used his powers to communicate with us because our limited intellect could not comprehend his essence. His powers allowed us to catch a glimpse of a reality that is beyond anything we can conceive. I had abandoned even this more mysterious conception of the theistic God for many reasons, which I had solidified after my deconversion, not least of which was because the evidence indicated that this type of theistic God was generated directly from the ideas of polytheism. But it was nice to see a conception of God that was closer to the ground of all being of panentheism, which I now felt was possibly the true form of God. I had encountered a possible expression of the God of panentheism in the Vedic concept of Brahman earlier in the history of God. Brahman was seen as the power that sustains everything. The whole world was the divine activity welling up from the mysterious being of Brahman, which was the inner meaning of all existence. The Vedic Upanishads encouraged people to cultivate a sense of Brahman in all things. Doing so was the unveiling of the hidden ground of all being, and the perception of unity beyond different phenomena. Brahman was not a deity to be thanked or feared by mankind. It was something to be experienced. As I read on, I saw that the Jews themselves began conceptualizing God in very similar ways to Brahman, cultivating God's presence in the smallest details of their daily life. This was the vision of Jews like Rabbi Hillel the Elder in 70 CE. Yet the consistency of these seemingly unified images of God started to break down as I thought about them. What did it mean that God was the ground of all being? Is God the world we see, or something beyond what we see? Did reality emanate from God, or was God reality itself? Was God the creative forces of the universe, or the basic laws upon which those forces were based? Did God live through human beings, or was God a reality outside of human beings? Was God simply everything, or was God something specific that we were seeking after? Was God the grounding that made our actions possible, or was God the energy with which we acted? All of these conceptions of a non-theistic God were different, and they all meant different things. What I was slowly starting to realize, as Armstrong exhibited more and more conceptions of God that had been expressed through the centuries, was that maybe God was just what we called things that we don't understand. Or maybe God was what we called powerful emotions we had. In describing God, perhaps what we were really describing were not things outside of us, but our own psychology, our connection to other people, our sense of wonder about the things in the world that we do understand, our sense of mystery about the things in the world that we don't understand. All these things had been called God, yet they all represented something distinctly different about physical reality. And saying that it is all God, that everything is God, is profound in its own way, but saying that also diminishes the special quality of each individual perspective. Again, perhaps what we were labeling as God was not the things outside of us, but the feelings we have when we experience these things, our own psychology. Even the first century Jews who studied under Rabbi Yohanan seemed to grasp this fact subconsciously. As they developed the concept of God, they stopped doctrinally forcing a specific theology, and instead established theology as a private matter, subjective to each person. But as my introspection had revealed, the concept of God was not only subjective between different individuals, but also subjective within the same individual from moment to moment. In one moment, God meant to me my connection to other people, In another, God meant the awe-inspiring laws of the universe. In yet another, God meant the awe-inspiring expression of the universe itself. Maybe God was not a thing. Maybe God was a feeling. Maybe God was an experience. Maybe God was an expression of our psychology. This was a disconcerting possibility for me to consider at first. Reaching out to some kind of ultimate reality outside of myself had always been an important part of my identity, and still is to this day. At first, I thought that letting go of a belief in a single, unifying quality of reality that could be called God meant letting go of that commitment to reach outside of myself and connect with a greater reality. In fact, letting go of using the word God was something I couldn't accept at first, and I scrambled to somehow make sense of it instead of letting it go. After tolerating a few more chapters of Armstrong's exposition of several more subjective historical iterations of the concept of God, I became frustrated and flipped to the last chapter of the book. What the hell was God in the modern world? I found Armstrong's answer less than satisfying. Her final chapter basically ended with her sorting through the many subjective historical conceptions of God to find the right fit for the modern age. Which God concept could work for us? But how could something that could be selected so subjectively, like we were shopping for the right pair of shoes or a good book to read, be thought of as the ultimate pinnacle of all reality? No. There was a creeping problem with all this reasoning about God. A creeping problem that had started to slowly but steadily crystallize as I read the theological reasoning of people like John Shelby Spong, Karen Armstrong, and religious thinkers throughout history. And that problem was evidence. None of these conceptions of God were motivated by verifiable and binding evidence. And without evidence, we might as well be debating about how many angels could fit on the head of a pin, or the best strategy Frodo Baggins could use to get the ring to Mordor. The theological thought process was contained entirely within our own minds and our own feelings, with no grounding in physical reality. This realization of a lack of grounding in evidence was a problem not only for theism, but for every conception of God, including panentheism and pantheism. If God was just a name that we gave things that we do have evidence for, then using the term God to describe them is meaningless and unhelpful because of the theological baggage the term carries. If we call the natural universe God, we risk implying that it has theistic properties when that isn't what we mean. This was one of Einstein's greatest mistakes as a de facto atheist, one that still annoys atheists today, as theists exuberantly claim him as a believer. But if God is meant to refer to something that is beyond our understanding, like something powerful and intelligent that preceded the universe, or a grounding of our perceived reality that we cannot fully understand, or a universal consciousness that benevolently guides all things, then another problem occurs. By the very nature of these claims, we have no evidence for them. Either way, as I thought about it over the next several months, I could not justify using the term God to describe any aspect of reality any longer. Again, perhaps God was just what we called things that made us feel a certain way. Perhaps ultimately, the best way to think of God was as a feeling we experience, a part of our own psychology. How was it that it was so hard for people to agree on what God was, yet so easy for them to agree that there was a God? Because God is a feeling of the ultimate and the numinous, a feeling that all people share and experience. Not a thing, but a feeling that we use to label our experiences, often the most meaningful experiences of our lives. And a lot of things throughout history had made people have this feeling. So a lot of things throughout history had been called God or called evidence of God. The explanation made a lot of sense. As I continued my journey over the next several years, I began to solidify my currently vague grasp on the principles of evidence and reason that had spontaneously led me to this conclusion. In fact, I began to solidify my grasp on a number of relevant scientific principles as well. Without even realizing what I was doing, I began to embark on a mental boot camp that would transform the way I perceive and think about the world.